Loneliness may be the greatest modifier of the human soul, and it needs to be recognized that there's a difference between loneliness and being alone. One could just as simply be lonely in a crowded theater as just alone in the middle of a desert. Loneliness is about perception. Loneliness is about the individual, his or herself. And in today's poem, Emily Dickinson professes perhaps, that exploring loneliness, especially one type of loneliness, may be the most dangerous thing you can do. But we have to ask ourselves, what is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? Knowledge you can gain from a book. Knowledge you could know from reading a poem. But wisdom, the type of wisdom that it takes to create a poem explicating the dangers of loneliness, well, that type of thing has to be experienced. This video is part of 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being obviously the Echoes of Emily playlist, but number 2 being a playlist of Emily Dickinson poetry discussions, and third, the general playlist for poetry discussions. If you like or appreciate the work that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literature in the future. The loneliness one dare not sound, and would as soon surmise, as in its grave go plumbing to ascertain the size. The loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see and perish from before itself for just a scrutiny. The horror not to be surveyed, but skirted in the dark, with consciousness suspended and being under lock. I fear me this is loneliness, the maker of the soul, its caverns and its corridors illuminate or seal. So I've got 3 real talking points when it comes to this poem, but I thought it would make a little bit of sense to walk through the poem stanza by stanza before we get into any of that. The loneliness one dare not sound, would as soon surmise, as in its grave go plumbing to ascertain the size. Look, this type of loneliness, the loneliness we're talking about here, this brand, you'd rather dig your own grave and lay in it just to see how it feels than to contemplate this loneliness. The loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see and perish from before itself for just a scrutiny. This type of loneliness is so profound that once you realize that's you, baby, once you realize you are in the grips of this type of loneliness, your consciousness cannot stand it. And so your consciousness says, nope, not me. I'm not the one. Nope. Have you ever been that guy, realized you were the stinky guy? I realized when I was in grad school, there was a guy next to me whose feet just stank. They stank to high heaven. They were awful. And all semester, I sat next to this guy in this cloistered little room, and it was awful. And I was so happy to be done with that class. And then the next semester started, and I was right back next to the guy with the stinky feet. Only he wasn't in the class. It was me the whole time. It was me. I realized I was stinky feet guy for about 6 months, and I had to remedy it. This type of loneliness, once you realize that's you, it's the opposite. You can't realize it's you. And so you adjust the way you think about yourself instead of adjusting your life, and now you're condemned to that life of loneliness. The horror not to be surveyed but skirted in the dark with consciousness suspended and being under lock. You will not admit to yourself that this is you. What kind of loneliness is this? That you will not admit to yourself it's you. I fear me, this is loneliness. The maker of the soul, its caverns and its corridors, illuminate or seal. It is loneliness more than any other thing, I think our author is stating here, that makes us who we are, makes us what we are. It is this loneliness and how we deal with it that makes our character. I fear me, this is loneliness, the maker of the soul. Its caverns and its corridors. Caverns where you dwell, corridors how you get to places. Illuminate, light them up, make you say, I do not want this type of loneliness. Let me work on my life. Let me become more valuable to other people. Or seal. Seal you in the cavern of your soul, as lonely as you ever could be. Now, what are we talking about with this poem? What is that loneliness? There are all sorts of lonelinesses. Lonelinesses is moments where you realize, man, kind of lonely. I'd rather. So, one of the things for me, I'm a very antisocial person. One of the things, however, that I have to do from time to time, I've learned this about myself as I've gotten older, is I have to go somewhere and be alone around other people. So for crusty old men like me, sometimes it's a diner at 3 a.m. where there's just 9 old, crusty guys being alone together. And normally it's a woman waitress who sounds like this, right? That's a type of loneliness. There is a type of loneliness that is motivating. There is a type of loneliness that you realize when you are in a season of change. There's all sorts of seasons of life. There's all sorts of types of loneliness. In these seasons of change, these moments where we identify things about ourselves that we know we have to change, kind of like we talked about earlier, but other things like you were on a weight loss journey. You were on a journey to become a writer. You were on a journey where you have to learn some craft or skill. These are journeys of loneliness. You have to do this thing in your own head. You have to commit to this thing. You have to become this thing by yourself. That's not a bad type of loneliness. What is the type of loneliness that our speaker is talking about? Is it the type of loneliness that prompts action? You know what action I'm talking about. The deletion of the self. Is that the type of loneliness that one dare not sound? If we go back and read the type of loneliness one dare not sound as tendencies towards self-deletion, let's read this poem one more time, understanding that it is a type of loneliness that leads to those thoughts, a type of loneliness that I am what I am and I will never be anything else, a type of loneliness that says tomorrow is not worth still being me. The existential question. If we reread this poem with that understanding, the loneliness one dare not sound as would, and why do I keep doing this? Remember that type of loneliness. The loneliness one dare not sound and would as soon surmise, as in its grave go plumbing to ascertain the size The loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see and perish from before itself for just a scrutiny. The horror not to be surveyed but skirted in the dark, with consciousness suspended and being under lock. I fear me, this is loneliness, the maker of the soul. Its caverns and its corridors illuminate or seal. Now, if we are going to take a nihilistic approach to this poem, which I suppose I've sort of already taken a bit of a darker turn with this one, stanza 2, the loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see and perish from before itself for just a scrutiny. You can't fight this loneliness. I fear me this is loneliness, the maker of the soul. Its caverns and its corridors illuminate or seal. It will change you, this loneliness, this thing that one dare not sound. It is after you. It will get you. And there's nothing you can do about it. That is certainly an interpretation to be had here. Now, hauntology, a hauntological interpretation of this poem. Loneliness and one here. The loneliness one dare not sound. We can read these as opposing entities. We can read these as separate characters. The loneliness is its own character. One dare not sound. The one daring not to sound, that character is present. That character is here and now. That character is running from the loneliness that exists and does not exist. The loneliness, the character that is not here, and yet it affects today. It is ghostly, this loneliness. It is haunting us, this loneliness. The loneliness one dare not sound, and would as soon surmise as in its grave go plumbing to ascertain the size. The loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see and perish from before itself for just a scrutiny. The horror not to be surveyed, but skirted in the dark, with consciousness suspended and being under lock. I fear me this is loneliness, the maker of the soul. Its caverns and its corridors illuminate or seal.